What happens when faith, family, and work collide? Join me and my special guest for this important conversation today on Family Vision. Hi, Rob Rienow here with Visionary Family Ministries. Welcome back to Family Vision, and we are in part 2 of my conversation with Joe Simonds from Salt Strong. Welcome back, Joe.
Back for more, baby.
In our previous conversation, Joe had a chance to introduce himself. He and his brother Luke are the founders of Salt Strong, which is an online fishing club down in Florida, and I'm a member of the club, an insider member, actually. And they do all this awesome education on saltwater fishing. But then every Sunday, Joe does a podcast called Unchurched, where he encourages people in their faith and in their walk with God. And Joe and I have gotten connected over this last year. In fact, they co-published our new book, Let There Be Fish, Become a Fisherman of Faith. And in our last episode, Joe, we talked about the launch of Salt Strong and what it really meant for you to put faith over fear when it came to being vocal and open about your relationship with Jesus, which is a little bit unusual, right, in the business and work world. But today I want to talk about your family, and I want to talk about something that I think everybody in the work world and entrepreneur world specifically understands, that sometimes our commitments at work and challenges at work present some pretty significant obstacles to our family life. So I wanted to have you, first of all, just tell us about your family and your family background, and let's then dive into this conversation. And I'm interested to talk to you both about your previous life as a financial planner, how that was affecting you in your early years of your marriage, but then specifically this entrepreneurial launch of the new business and what happened at home as a result of that.
Absolutely. So going back to the early days, Luke, middle brother, youngest brother Daniel, and I am Joseph. As you can tell, all biblical names. My parents, I would say, very religious, and it was something we did every Sunday, rain or shine, no matter what's going on. Even as I shared in the last time at Daytona Beach, my parents were dragging us to some church, no matter where we were. I, in particular, the oldest son, and to me, it was very boring. And I'm seeing in two out of my 3 kids that kind of have this ADD, ADHD, whatever we're all calling it these days, but just wired like that and kind of want to be doing stuff and tough to sit still. And I remember, my parents forcing me to be an acolyte, and it was Episcopalian church, and just, in Florida in the middle of summer, wearing that thick white robe, and just, it was not comfortable. And I couldn't sit still. And so I didn't get probably what my parents wanted me to get out of it, I guess is the nicest way to put it. And as soon as I went to college, I would still say I was a Christian, but as I kind of mentioned earlier, just probably did some dumb stuff, joined a fraternity, and partying was a bigger part of my life than going to church was at the time, not having any parents to look over me, etc. Had a scare with cancer when I was in my late 20s, and it's a whole long story, but really turned that around shortly after, really because of my cancer, if you can believe it. That's how I met my wife. And so much changed after that. I ended up being right at 30 when we got married. We have 3 beautiful, amazing kids today that just keep us on our toes. And
tell me your wife's name again.
Yeah, Lauren. So Lauren is the wife, and then my daughter Shauna is 11, and then Savannah, where my wife is from, Savannah, Georgia, is just turned 9, and then little Action Jackson is 6. So we're in that phase of, one obviously is wanting to become self-sufficient and think she's a teenager, and the youngest one, and just learned how to tie his shoes literally 2 weeks ago at 6 years old. So but also just a really, really fun time. I think one of the questions and kind of topics we talked about offline was just balance, and I think that's probably what I struggled with, and still today struggle with the most, is balancing my time with them, my walk with God, just, life in general, going to church. I'll be honest, like we had the best church ever in Georgia when we lived there. It's called 12 Stone. Absolutely loved it. And we moved here. We found it tougher to find that home because we were just so in love with where we were.
Right.
And then COVID hit. And as you know, it gave us a billion excuses not to go. And so long story short, juggling all of that stuff and trying to run a business where I've got now 20 something people and their families that are counting on me as the CEO and the leader and the visionary to make sure this is working so they have paychecks. It's a lot to balance. And I don't know that I've ever been balanced. I don't know that it exists. Maybe someone's figured it out, but I feel like there are months where my marriage is just rock solid, but then I'll look over like, man, the business is kind of like slowing down. I got to get back in there and really go to town on it. And same with family and same with my walk with God and my biblical community. Those are all things that we talk about quite a bit in that C12 group. And it's wild to kind of see we call it our wheel. There'll be just some months the wheel looks like it ain't going to roll anywhere. And there are some months where it's kind of rolling a little bit smoothly based on all those different categories. But I don't know. I mean, have you ever felt like you had just full balance? It just seems like every time you feel like you're getting there, you look around and something's out of whack on one of them. It's been one of the toughest things for me I'm competitive and I want all of them to do well. And that's probably still my biggest struggle.
Yeah. No, I share often about this 2004 repentance in my life, right? 10 years as a youth pastor, investing in everybody else's kids, spiritually neglecting my children. Yeah. God brings me to this place of brokenness and repentance, turns my heart to the ministry of my kids, and begins us then on this journey of really prioritizing our home as our first ministry. Yeah. And, I've had people ask me questions over the years about that turnaround time. And their question sort of implies that it was a one-time deal. In other words, 2004, God reoriented me, right? God, wife, children, church, ministry, got everything in order, and I'm good to go for the last 19 years. No, it has been rinse and repeat. God turning my heart back to him again as I go through periods where I'm cold in my faith, turning my heart back to my wife. The marriage books or statistics, we used to hear that if you made it through 7 years, like that was the rough time, and then you sort of settle in. I've lost track of the number of friends who have divorced after 20 years now.
Yeah, sad.
And Amy and we're coming up on 29 years of marriage this summer. And I know, praise God, but our 20s here have not been easy. We looked at each other after 20 plus years of marriage, and we're like, we have invested so heavily in our kids and so heavily in our ministry, which we do side by side, that we have not made the necessary inputs, right? The necessary investments in just us. Like we sort of lost our couple identity. We had our family identity. We had our ministry identity. So we've been, having to backfill, right? And be more intentional than ever before, because in some ways I feel like we sort of went on autopilot a little bit, and things began to corrode underneath the surface. Was there some challenges for you in the marriage or parenting front when you first launched Salt Strong?
Oh gosh, yeah. And I think not to scare anyone from following their dreams of being an entrepreneur, because you should definitely do it, and don't let fear get in the way of that. But, anytime you start something new, and you've done this, I'm sure many listeners have done this, it's not just easy. You don't just start a company and create an LLC or, get your logo and it just starts working. You have to put the time into it. It's just like anything. I mean, if think of it just like a garden, you don't just throw a couple seeds in and hope and pray everything works. You got to put some labor on that. And so in the beginning, as I mentioned, I'm just kind of wired that way. I was really going all in and certainly working way too many hours. And I hadn't really figured out the working smarter, not harder. And this is the one, oh, this is a really tough one. So we were in Tampa. So we had not moved to where we are now in Winter Haven. And I've had different battles with alcohol. And I wrote about it. My very first book was called Fishing for Happiness. And that was just kind of a long journey of finding out where God wanted me. And that those first couple of years, my wife was a doctor and starting her practice. So we were both going all over the place. And I would just come home every day exhausted and just want to drink. And so I wasn't drinking heavily, like getting drunk, but every night for the most part, I'd have 1 to 3 beers. And so let's just say that went on for 6, 7, 8 months. And my daughter, Shauna, this is something I'll never forget. It was a Saturday morning. She's cute as can be. And I'm guessing she's 7-ish at the 6 or 7. Yeah, probably 6. So she's smart enough to like figure out what's going on. And she made us a little menu. She was going to try to make us breakfast. So she'd been watching Mom and she goes, I can figure this out. And she brought us a little menu. And, it half the stuff was misspelled as a 6-year-old, and is eggs and bacon and, pancakes. And then my 2 drink options were beer or wine. And I go, oh my gosh. And my wife saw it, and she's embarrassed for me. And she's like, Joe, that is your sign that our daughter is watching you closely, and you cannot be doing that stuff. Because I would have it at the dinner table. And so that was like an eye-opening one to me of just how much our kids are watching us, even at 6 years old, even probably at 3 years old. And then how much they want to be like you. And I was like, I don't want her doing this stuff. I shouldn't even be doing this stuff. And so that was like an automatic 0 alcohol, even during the week, but certainly not at the table or anything like that. And we're still pretty good about that. Maybe on the weekends, we're cooking out, there might be a beer. I'm certainly not perfect, but that was one of those eye-opening moments. It just, the same one you share with me, it was just like gut-wrenching, like, And so much of it was just from being overworked and just stressed out. And that was like my one stress relief, to get that quick little, beer buzz. And it was like, but it wasn't worth it. And it wasn't something that I wanted my daughter to be writing about on a menu and when she's, that young. The other ones were more around my wife, as especially as the marriage progresses and and as people even progress and their needs change. She really wanted to be, she has a different love language than I do, and hers is really just going on a date and travel. Those are like her 2 things, like it just one-on-one. And I found out the hard way of like, it's like, we haven't had a date in 2 months. I was like, we just went out last weekend to dinner. She's like, well, that was with her friends, that doesn't count. So like, to me it counted, but you start realizing what counts and doesn't count. And so that was probably the toughest one, is I was having trouble, like just trying to keep this company alive and still having to make time for the kids and to have a date with her, and to be able to even afford to have a date with her, babysitters and dinner, all this stuff costs a lot of money. And those first few years were certainly the most stressful. They were the ones that's when I believe it's important. And I'm telling my kids, where you have a partner who believes the same thing that you do, and will love you and support you even when times are really, really tough, and doesn't just turn to a quick divorce the second things get tough. Because that would have been an easy time probably for her to say, man, I hardly even see you. You're all over the place. But she stuck with me, and we obviously worked through a lot of little small things. There wasn't anything that was massively big, but it was mostly just me not being there for all the things I needed to be there for. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate you sharing both of those things. I appreciate you sharing about the alcohol struggle too.
Yeah.
And somebody's listening right now, they've got a spouse or a child who has raised the flag and said, hey, I think maybe, sort of, kind of, you might need to look at this, or maybe they've said it a whole lot more aggressively than that. What would you say to that person right now? That what would be the immediate action step? Hey, if anybody in your life has expressed a concern about them and alcohol, what do they do? What's the very first thing?
Wow, that's a tough one. What number one is listen to your loved ones. I mean, that to me, God put that in front of my face that morning for a specific reason. He couldn't get through to me through anything else, through, maybe a little bit, a few pounds added on. And to me, that was the sign I needed to stop. But I did a recent podcast about that, and not about alcohol in general, but just everything that we're doing to our bodies. And we only get one shot with this body on this earth. And
was that the one just a couple weeks ago on basically health and taking care of your body?
Yep. And so I
thought that was terrible. I have a little too convicting, but keep going.
But that was it. I always go back to God and the prayer, like, God, all right, is this the best I could do with my body? And usually the answer is no, especially if you're drinking every single day like I was. It's just, it's tough. It's tough to even argue why you need that. And I tried to, like, looking back, I did try. I was like, well, I need this. It's a way to calm down. And now I have more on my plate than I ever did back then. And I don't have to have that. None of us have to have that. And so I would do it for your loved ones more than anything else. Especially the kids, the fact that she was so in tune to that. And how did she spelt wine wrong or something like that, like Wiene or something. But even the fact that she put those two together at that age, I was like, whoa, it blew me away. It blew my mind. I was just like, whoa. And that's one of those little moments. I haven't told her that now that she's 11, that whole story. But it's something I will definitely never forget.
Well, one of the practical suggestions that you might want to take away from our conversation today is just call a family meeting and just ask this question. Hey, and ask your spouse, ask your kids, how do you feel like I'm doing with balancing work and home? How do you feel like I'm doing in prioritizing home over work? Now, we all know there's seasons where work is nuts and we're just not as home as often as we'd like. So we accept that. Yeah. But putting that conversation out on the table, letting kids speak honestly about their thoughts and feelings, listening to your spouse and let them speak honestly and hear their feedback. I think a lot of us get into trouble. And part of what I heard you saying, Joe, is we are just on autopilot with all this stuff. We're not assessing. We're not being introspective with ourselves and evaluating. We don't have a C12 group around us. And that's a ministry I'd encourage folks to get connected with in the business world. Matter of fact, Joe, I reached out to our Chicago C12 guy last week because of talking to you. So I think that's going to be a helpful thing in my life. Joe, before I say goodbye here, tell us how people can get connected with you and with Salt Strong.
Yeah, saltstrong.com is the main site where we have everything. And then Joe, I'll just give you my email. I always do it on these podcasts. I love hearing from anyone who wants to reach out with any kind of questions, et cetera, regardless of, I struggled a lot with anxiety attacks. Obviously, I touched on the alcohol piece of it and even just the overall, work-life balance. Joe at saltstrong.com. So Joe at saltstrong.com. I have one more thing I could share that helped me. So my grandfather was what you would call like this Renaissance man. This is ironically the other grandfather. And he ended up at the time, this was not very common at all, created his own office. His three daughters, which one of them was my mom, were his life. And obviously his wife was too. And he created his own home office where he really worked there as with a really big company where 100% of everybody else went into an office. And he's like, guys, if you want me in this at this company, this is the one thing I won't negotiate on. And I always remember my mom saying that she always felt like her dad was just always there in a good way. And they were incredibly close. But the one thing in particular, because a lot of us have home offices now through COVID, is that anytime one of the girls came up to him, even while it was in the middle of the day, like in summertime, and said anything, he would stop what he was doing. And like, let's just say my child was right here and turn around and face them and give full attention. And I struggle with that. But I have created my home office here. I don't go into the office very rarely at all for that reason. And my kids are home a lot. And that's the one thing I try to work on. So I would encourage you, and I can tell how our relationship changes when I do that. Even if I'm in something important, when I literally, because most of the time, what do we do, right? We're still staring at, yeah, I hear you. You're staring at the computer, you're on your phone. Yeah, I hear you. And I will literally stop and look them straight in the eye and just give them every bit of my attention. And you can see the dynamic change when you do that as an adult to a child, or even as a grown adult versus someone who's just barely paying attention. And that, to me, I share that with you because I'm working on it, and I always remember my grandfather doing it. And I think that's one of the easier things that we can do as parents to become closer and really just to give our attention to our kids. There's a time, as you know, when kids get older, they don't even want you around and your attention. So while I have it, I'm going to try to give them every bit that I can.
Joe, that's awesome. Thank you. I think every single parent could benefit from putting that principle into practice, and I'm going to work on that myself. We've loved this conversation. We love seeing you on YouTube. We love having you a part of the podcast network, but we'd really like to see you face to face. This fall, we have got live Visionary Family conferences in Nashville, in Jacksonville. We've got a family worship event here in Illinois. We have a Thanksgiving ball here in Illinois, which is like a formal event for your family. 2024, we've got our VFM weekend away in June at the Kalahari Resort in Wisconsin Dells. And information is coming out very soon about Visionary Family Israel Tour.
Cool.
Last 2 weeks of March 2024. Details coming soon. It is going to be epic, an Israel tour for your whole family. You can get all the information about those events on our website, visionaryfam.com/events. And we would love to see you. You can always reach out to us with prayer needs, with questions, comments, thoughts about today's episode at podcast@visionaryfam.com. And we look forward to our next time with you on Family Vision.